If you are interested in supporting this podcast and at the same time getting all my episodes ad-free, then please head to my website, 3dprintingbasicspod.com. Again, that's 3dprintingbasicspod.com. There you can find all the links to support me, my affiliate links, and as a perk, you can get all my episodes ad-free if you subscribe on Patreon, Spotify, or Apple Music. Again, all my links will be there, as well as a contact form if you have any questions. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome back to 3D Printing Basics. This is episode number 64, and in this episode, we're going to be discussing whether an enclosure works for your 3D printer. We're going to be going over the benefits of it, the negatives of it, and whether or not it makes sense if you don't have a 3D printer that has a built-in enclosure. Before we get into that, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for all the support that you guys have. It really means the world to me that you guys are willing to check in and listen to these episodes every single week. I couldn't have imagined the support that I would get when I first started this podcast 64 episodes ago. I'm just so grateful for it. So thank you guys so much for listening. It means the world to me. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into today's episode. All right, so I first want to talk about when or where we kind of think that an enclosure might be necessary if you don't have a printer with a built-in enclosure like a Bambu Labs. Most Bambu Lab printers, the P1S and the X1C, they come in with built-in enclosures, so you don't really need to worry about that. But if you don't have that, and if you're only planning on printing PLA, if you're just kind of a hobbyist maker who wants to print some things around the house, maybe make some toys here and there, but you're not really getting into various different types of materials, then an enclosure really isn't going to be necessary for you. In my personal experience, I've printed thousands of hours of PLA, and the enclosure can sometimes hinder the ability for PLA to print well. I've noticed, especially on overhangs, if it's a really hot day and I'm printing with the door closed on my Bambu Labs printers, the overhangs tend to droop a lot because there's not as much cooling as there needs to be, and the temperature inside is so hot. The PLA doesn't cool as fast as it needs to, and then therefore on overhangs when it's printing over open air or with supports, it tends to droop a little bit, and that can kind of degrade the quality of your 3D prints. So that's something that is definitely something you need to look out for, and it's important that we are paying attention to what kind of material we're using, what kind of 3D prints we are planning on making, and the situation that we are in, what room, what temperature, what kind of air conditioning do we have. That's everything that we need to look for when we are 3D printing in order to give ourselves the best chance at coming out with a successful print. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay. Ready to take your electronics projects to the next level? PCBWay offers everything you need, from custom PCBs to 3D printing and even CNC machining, all under one roof. They're trusted by engineers and makers worldwide for their exceptional quality and fast turnaround. And here's a special deal for listeners of 3D Printing Basics. Use the promo code 3DPrintingSquared, SQUARED, to get $10 off your first order. Start your next project with PCBWay and see the difference for yourself. Head over to PCBWay.com today. Now, on the other hand, say you're starting a 3D printing business where, for example, you want to print car parts and you want to make custom parts that go on cars, and so they need to be outside, and so you decide to print almost exclusively out of ABS filament. ABS filament is a very, very durable printing filament, but you need it to have a really, really high temperature, and even then you will almost certainly deal with bed adhesion and first layer adhesion issues, and so that is where an enclosure would make the most sense, because what an enclosure is going to do is it's going to increase the ambient air temperature around your 3D printer, and that is going to make the ABS a little bit soft while it's printing. It's not going to cool down as fast, which is going to make sure that not only that it has good layer adhesion, but it's also going to make sure that the first layer really sticks to the bed and doesn't peel up or warp or do anything like that. Because the reason that ABS warps is because of something called thermal contraction. ABS, it shrinks a lot when it cools down. It expands when it's heated up and it shrinks when it cools. And the shrinkage is much more pronounced in materials like ABS rather than PLA. And so say you're 3D printing and you have some cool ambient air around you, that's going to cause ABS to shrink, and that's going to really pull at the corners and cause them to pop off the bed because it just can't hold down those corners. And so having that warm air around the ABS the ABS printed part while it's printing is going to cause it to not shrink as much, and therefore it's not going to pop off or peel up the corners of your print. And so that's where an enclosure is really, I would say it's necessary when you're printing high temperature materials like ABS, because I would believe that most high temperature filaments like PEEK, ABS, ASA, nylon, they're all going to have that shrinkage problem. And so that's why it's generally recommended that you use an enclosure when you're printing with high temperature materials. Some other benefits for using an enclosure are that it traps or at least limits fumes. I definitely like it when I'm printing ASA and I use the enclosed 3D printers that I have. I definitely don't smell it nearly as much when I'm in the room versus when I'm using my open non-enclosure 3D printers. That's when the smell is definitely a lot more pronounced, and it can definitely give me a headache if I'm in there for too long. So that's definitely something to consider if you're going to have a 3D printer, especially when it's like next to you on your desk or something like that, and you're going to need to be printing some high temperature or high VOC materials. An enclosure could work really well, especially like the Bamboo Labs printers. They have options to be able to put carbon filters on the exhaust fans of their enclosed printers, so you can get almost no fumes when you are using them and printing some high VOC parts. It also can protect your prints. I definitely had a problem for a long time with my prints popping up off the bed of one of my printers, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why it was happening until one day the air conditioning was on and I realized that the air conditioning duct pointed right at the bed of my 3D printer, and that was causing some premature cooling, which caused the part to shrink more than expected, and that would cause it to basically counteract or nullify the effects of the heated bed and would cause the PLA part to pop up. And so once I moved the 3D printer out of the way of the air duct and moved a enclosed 3D printer into that same spot, those problems went away. And that's definitely something to consider if you're running any kind of 3D print, if you just have 3D printers anywhere, because you're going to have them in enclosed or inside space most likely, and there's going to be air conditioning in there, or there's going to be fans of some kind. So just make sure you're aware of where all the airflow is in your 3D printers, and make sure that it's no unwanted airflow is being directed right at the printer. A couple more helpful components of having enclosed 3D printers is that it can protect your printer from dust. Although in my experience, while it does protect your printer from dust, it also captures all the failed prints, all the little bits of plastic. The bottoms of my Bamboo Labs are just a hotbed for kind of trash, not trash, but discarded or failed 3D prints that just fall to the bottom, and they're kind of tough to clean up. So I often just let them pile up there longer than I should and then do one giant cleanup. So that's definitely something to consider. And it can also keep your kids and pets safe from the moving parts and the hot components of 3D printers. I don't have any kids or pets, so I wouldn't know if that's an issue or not. But if you're running a printer at home, especially if you're gone at work and it's running while kids are home or while pets at home, a enclosure can definitely help with the safety aspect, because that way nobody's poking around maybe where they shouldn't be, especially if they don't understand how a 3D printer works. And especially with how fast these 3D printers have gotten, the rapid movements are definitely something that could catch a child or a pet off guard, and it can end up squishing fingers or just straight up burning them. Like I said, these printers run at hundreds of degrees. So just touching it, if you don't know where anything is, even though there's warnings, you could touch the nozzle while it's running, and that could result in some really serious burns. So I like having an enclosure on the printer just for the extra safety aspect of things. But to wrap things up, like I said, it's definitely the biggest factor to consider is going to be what material you're using. If you're planning on only printing with PLA, then I would say an enclosure is definitely not necessary. Or you could at least go with one of the cheaper ones like the zip up or kind of mesh enclosures that I've seen from time to time. But if you're planning on printing some high temperature filaments like ASA, ABS, nylon, carbon fiber, PEEK, anything like that requires a nozzle temperature usually of above 250 degrees and a bed temperature of around 100 degrees, then that's definitely something that you are going to want to consider getting an enclosure for, because you can definitely get one for pretty cheap. If you really wanted to, you can absolutely make one yourself. I've even resorted to just putting a cardboard box over my printers from time to time. And it really works. You don't need a whole lot. You just kind of need something that protects the airflow around the printer, and then that ambient temperature will start to heat up, and then you will basically have everything that you're looking for in an enclosure. So there are lots of different ways that you can incorporate an enclosure into your 3D printer, but I would say overall it's definitely a helpful tool to have if you are interested in printing those higher temperature filaments. And with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any kind of suggestions or ideas, feel free to let me know, either in the comments or messaging me directly or through my Patreon. Just feel free to let me know. I'm definitely love talking with fans or listeners of the podcast, and I'm always open to new ideas. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.